romantic about them. At college, he had at last managed to get into bed with one. This was due entirely to the initiative of his partner, who, when Christopher became scared and started to raise objections, locked the door and sat down firmly on Christopher's lap. I'm still grateful to him. I hope he's alive and may happen to read these lines. Other experiences followed, all of them enjoyable, but none entirely satisfying. This was because Christopher was suffering from an inhibition, then not unusual among upper-class homosexuals. He couldn't relax sexually with a member of his own class or nation. He needed a working-class foreigner. He had become clearly aware of this when he went to Germany in May 1928, to stay with an elderly cousin who was the British consul at Bremen. He had no love adventures while there, but he looked around him and saw what he was missing. The Bremen trip isn't even mentioned in Lions and Shadows, because Christopher was then unwilling to discuss its sexual significance. It's described in a novel written many years later, Down There on a Visit, but with too much fiction and too little frankness. Christopher's first visit to Berlin was short, a week or 10 days, but that was sufficient. I now recognize it as one of the decisive events of my life. I can still make myself faintly feel the delicious nausea of initiation terror which Christopher felt as Whiston pushed back the heavy leather door curtain of a boy bar called the Cozy Corner and led the way inside. In the autumn of 1928, Christopher had felt a different kind of nauseated excitement, equally strong and memorable, when, as a medical student, he had entered an operating theatre in St. Thomas's Hospital to watch his first surgical operation. But the door of the operating theatre, unlike that of the Cozy Corner, led him nowhere. Within 6 months, he had given up medicine altogether. At the Cozy Corner, Christopher met a youth, whom I shall call Bubby, Baby. That was his nickname among his friends, because he had a pretty face, appealing blue eyes, golden blonde hair, and a body which was smooth-skinned and almost hairless, although hard and muscular. On seeing Bubby, Christopher experienced instant infatuation. This wasn't surprising. To be infatuated was what he had come to Berlin for. Bubby was the first presentable candidate who appeared to claim the leading role in Christopher's love myth. What was this role? Most importantly, Bubby had to be the German boy, the representative of his race. Bubby was actually Czech, but that could be overlooked since German was the only language he spoke. By embracing Bubby, Christopher could hold in his arms the whole mystery magic of foreignness, Germanness. By means of Bubby, he could fall in love with and possess the entire nation. That Bubby was a blonde was also very important, and not merely because blondness is a characteristic feature of the German boy. The blonde, no matter of what nationality, had been a magical figure for Christopher from his childhood, and would continue to be so for many years. And yet I find it hard to say why. John Layard would have encouraged me to invent an explanation, never mind how absurd it sounded. He would have said that anything one invents about oneself is part of one's personal myth, and therefore true. So here is the first explanation which occurs to me. Christopher chose to identify himself with a black-haired British ancestor, and to see the blonde as the invader who comes from another land to conquer and rape him. Thus the blonde becomes the masculine foreign yang, mating with Christopher's feminine native yin. This makes a kind of Jungian sense, but I can't by any stretch of the imagination apply it to the relations between Bubby and Christopher. Bubby had been, among other things, a boxer, so he must have been capable of aggression. But with Christopher, he was gentle, considerate, almost too polite. In addition to being able to play the German boy and the blonde, Bubby had a role which he had created for himself. He was the wanderer, the lost boy, homeless, penniless, dreamily passive, yet tough, careless of danger, indifferent to hardship, roaming the earth. This was how Bubby saw himself, and how he made Christopher and many others.